In the beginning, Avery Collins believed love was something you protected by holding it close. She had married Ethan Collins on a quiet October afternoon under amber trees, convinced that devotion meant permanence. Back then, Ethan's laughter had filled every corner of their small apartment, and Avery had memorized the way his eyes softened when he looked at her. She had chosen him not just for stability, but for warmth. 2 years later, warmth had been replaced by routine. Ethan was still kind. He still kissed her forehead before leaving for work. But the kisses had grown absent-minded, like checking off a task. His architecture firm had expanded quickly, and with growth came longer hours, heavier expectations, and constant deadlines. Avery tried to be supportive. She told herself this was temporary, that ambition required sacrifice. But sacrifice, she was learning, rarely asked permission from both people. Most evenings followed the same script. Avery prepared dinner. Ethan arrived late, loosened his tie, and apologized while scanning emails on his phone. She would ask about his day. He would answer in efficient summaries. When she tried to linger in conversation, asking how he felt about a new client or whether the pressure was overwhelming, he would reassure her with a quick smile and change the subject. "You worry too much," Ethan would say gently. "Everything's fine." Fine became the word that built a wall between them. Avery had once filled their apartment with music. Now she kept it quiet, as if silence suited their marriage better. She found herself sitting alone on the couch after dinner, staring at the faint city lights outside their window. The loneliness wasn't loud or dramatic. It was subtle, almost polite. It waited beside her while Ethan worked in the study. She never doubted that Ethan loved her. That was the problem. Love was there, but it had stopped moving. One Thursday evening, Ethan mentioned that an old college friend had moved back to the city. "His name's Noah Bennett," Ethan said, loosening his cufflinks. "We studied architecture together. He's consulting on a project nearby. I invited him over Saturday." Avery welcomed the idea of company. Their home had begun to feel like a waiting room, and she missed laughter echoing off the walls. "I'll cook something special," she offered. Saturday arrived with nervous energy she couldn't quite explain. Avery chose a soft blue dress Ethan once said brought out her eyes. She told herself she was dressing up because guests deserved effort. Still, when she caught her reflection in the mirror, she noticed something else, a quiet hope that someone would truly see her. Noah Bennett arrived exactly on time. He carried no briefcase, no laptop, no air of exhaustion. Instead, he brought a bottle of wine and an easy grin. His presence shifted the atmosphere immediately. Where Ethan's energy felt sharp and preoccupied, Noah's was attentive. "Avery, right?" Noah said warmly as Ethan introduced them. "Ethan used to talk about you in college. Said you were the brave one." Avery blinked. "Brave? He told me you encouraged him to start his own firm when he was afraid to," Noah replied casually. Ethan gave a dismissive shrug. Ancient history. But it wasn't ancient to Avery. She remembered those nights vividly, sitting cross-legged on the floor with Ethan, mapping out dreams bigger than their bank account. Hearing Noah reference that memory felt like someone had reopened a window in a stuffy room. Dinner unfolded easily. Noah asked questions and waited for answers. When Avery spoke, he didn't interrupt or glance at his phone. He laughed fully, not cautiously. He noticed details, complimented the seasoning, the decor, the framed photographs on the wall. At one point, Ethan excused himself to take a call from a client. The conversation was brief but intense. His voice sharpened in the hallway, frustration bleeding through professionalism. Avery felt embarrassment tighten her chest, as though Ethan's stress reflected on her. Noah watched her expression shift. "He's under a lot of pressure," Noah said gently, not judgmental, just observant. "I know," Avery replied quickly. "It's important to him. That doesn't mean it's easy for you." The words landed softly but precisely. Not accusatory, not invasive, simply aware. Avery found herself studying Noah more carefully. He didn't look at her with pity. He looked at her as if he were genuinely trying to understand the shape of her silence. Ethan returned moments later, apologizing, tension still clinging to him. The evening resumed, but something subtle had changed. Avery felt as though someone had adjusted the lighting in the room. Nothing dramatic, just enough to reveal shadows she had been pretending not to see. When Noah finally stood to leave, he thanked Avery for dinner with a sincerity that lingered after the door closed. "That was nice," Ethan said, already checking his messages again. "We should do that more often." "Yes," Avery replied quietly. But she wasn't thinking about future dinner parties. She was thinking about how it felt to be asked a question and have someone wait for her answer. Later that night, as Ethan fell asleep almost instantly, Avery lay awake staring at the ceiling. She replayed small moments from the evening. The way Noah remembered her influence on Ethan's career, the way he noticed her hesitation before speaking, the way he filled pauses without rushing to escape them. She felt guilty for noticing that IT wasn't attraction, she told herself. It was simply attention, and attention should not feel like oxygen. Beside her, Ethan shifted in his sleep, murmuring something incoherent before settling again. Avery turned toward him, studying the familiar outline of his face in the dark. She loved this man. She had chosen him. She would choose him again. Oh, why did she feel like something had already begun to slip? Avery closed her eyes and whispered a silent promise to herself. She would not let distance become disaster. She would try harder. She would speak up. She would not allow a single evening to mean more than it should. But somewhere deep inside, a fragile boundary had been drawn, and she wasn't sure how close she was standing to it. The week after Noah Bennett's visit, Avery Collins told herself the evening had meant nothing. She returned to her routines with deliberate discipline, determined to prove that her marriage required effort, not imagination. If there was distance between her and Ethan Collins, she would be the one to bridge it. On Monday, she waited up for him with a pot of coffee growing cold between her hands. Ethan arrived past 10, shoulders tense, apology already forming before he stepped fully inside. Client revisions, he explained, loosening his tie. They changed everything last minute. Avery nodded and listened carefully, asking questions she hoped would invite depth instead of summaries. Ethan answered, but his gaze drifted toward his laptop bag as if the unfinished work inside it were calling him by name. When she gently suggested they plan a weekend away, just us, no phones, Ethan smiled tiredly. After this project, he promised, things will calm down. Avery had begun to understand that after this project was a horizon that kept moving. 2 days later, Noah sent Ethan a text about meeting for lunch near the construction site. Ethan declined. Meetings had multiplied. That evening, as Avery washed dishes alone, her phone vibrated with a message from an unfamiliar number. Hey, it's Noah. I hope it's not strange that I asked Ethan for your number. I wanted to thank you again for dinner. Avery stared at the screen longer than necessary. It wasn't inappropriate. It wasn't secretive. Ethan had been copied in the earlier group message. Still, her pulse shifted subtly. She responded politely. You're welcome. It was nice having company. Noah replied almost immediately. It felt good being somewhere that didn't revolve around deadlines. Avery hesitated before typing again. Deadlines seemed to follow Ethan home. 3 dots appeared, vanished, and returned. And you? What follows you home? The question unsettled her, not because it crossed a line, but because it reached somewhere quiet inside her. She typed and erased 3 different answers before settling on something safe. Mostly laundering grocery list. Noah's response arrived slower this time. You don't strike me as someone who's defined by errands. Avery locked her phone without replying. She felt exposed, as if someone had adjusted the lens on her life and noticed what she had been minimizing. That night, Ethan fell asleep mid-sentence while describing a design modification. Avery watched him, searching for resentment and finding none. She loved him. She wanted him. But wanting someone who wasn't emotionally present felt like speaking across a widening canyon. Over the next few days, Noah's messages remained measured and infrequent. He asked about books she liked after noticing a novel on her shelf. He mentioned a cafe near her workplace and said she might enjoy the quiet atmosphere. Each interaction remained outwardly innocent, yet each exchange carried a layer of attentiveness she had been missing. Avery told herself she could control this. Conversation was not betrayal. Friendship was not infidelity. Boundaries were clear, and she respected them. Still, when Noah suggested meeting for coffee, strictly as friends, she paused longer than she should have. She informed Ethan that she planned to catch up with Noah near downtown. Ethan barely looked up from his tablet. That's good, he said. He doesn't know many people here yet. The ease of Ethan's trust pressed against Avery's conscience. She wasn't hiding anything, but she wasn't revealing everything either, not the subtle anticipation tightening in her chest. The cafe Noah had mentioned was small and warmly lit, filled with muted conversation and the scent of roasted beans. When Avery entered, Noah stood immediately, his expression brightening in a way that felt personal. I'm glad you came, he said. They spoke first about neutral topics. Ethan's workload, the city's changing skyline, shared memories from college days she hadn't been part of. Gradually, the conversation shifted. Noah asked about her own ambitions. You supported Ethan's dreams, he said. What about yours? Avery had not expected the question. I teach part-time at the community center, she replied carefully. That's what you do? Noah clarified. I'm asking what you want. The distinction unsettled her. She realized she hadn't allowed herself to articulate desire in months. Marriage had become a structure she maintained, not a landscape she explored. I used to paint, she admitted quietly. I stopped when things got busy. Busy or crowded? Noah asked. Avery met his eyes then, recognizing the risk in how easily he read her pauses. There was no flirtation in his tone, only attentiveness sharpened by empathy. Yet, that empathy felt intimate. They remained in the cafe longer than planned. When she finally checked the time, guilt surged unexpectedly. I should go, she said, gathering her purse. Noah nodded without resistance. I'm not trying to complicate anything, Avery. The directness startled her. You're not. I just don't think you deserve to feel invisible. The word invisible struck harder than she anticipated. She stood quickly, offering a polite goodbye that felt inadequate compared to the weight of what lingered between them. Driving home, Avery replayed the conversation repeatedly. Nothing explicit had occurred. No boundaries had visibly shattered. Yet she felt as though she had stepped closer to something fragile. Home. Ethan was seated at the dining table, surrounded by blueprints. He looked up with distracted affection. How was coffee? It was good, she answered truthfully. Ethan returned to his work without further questions. Avery stood watching him for a moment, waiting for curiosity that didn't come. Waiting for him to ask what she and Noah had discussed, what she had laughed about, what she had revealed. Instead, he said, "Can you hand me that ruler?" She passed it to him, noticing how naturally she fit into the space beside him. Supportive, steady, predictable. Later that night, Avery opened her closet and pulled out an old canvas from the back shelf. The paint was dry and cracked, colors faded but still visible. She ran her fingers over the surface, remembering who she had been when she created it. Fearless, expressive, certain. Her phone buzzed softly on the dresser. I hope you got home safe, Noah's message read. Avery stared at it in the dim light. She typed a brief reply. I did. Thank you. Another message followed almost instantly. I meant what I said. You shouldn't feel invisible. Her chest tightened. Not with romance, but with recognition. Someone had named what she hadn't dared to say aloud. Across the hall, Ethan's voice carried faintly as he took another late-night call. Professional. Focused. Distant. Avery set her phone down carefully, as if it were fragile glass. She understood, with sudden clarity, that emotional lines rarely announce themselves when they're crossed. They blur gradually, disguised as understanding and comfort. Standing alone in the quiet bedroom, Avery realized she was no longer standing far from the boundary she had promised herself to protect. And for the first time, she wasn't entirely sure she wanted to step back. Avery Collins began measuring her days and moments she didn't mention to Ethan. The messages with Noah Bennett remained infrequent enough to appear harmless, yet meaningful enough to alter the emotional temperature of her week. She told herself that secrecy would be the true betrayal, so she avoided deleting anything. Still, she found herself angling her phone away when Ethan entered the room. Not out of fear, but out of reluctance to explain something she didn't fully understand herself. Ethan Collins, meanwhile, moved through their apartment like a man racing a clock only he could see. The firm had secured a major contract, and his name would be attached to a building that could define his career. Avery admired his dedication. She just no longer knew where she fit inside it. One evening, while Ethan revised blueprints at the dining table, Avery gathered enough courage to speak plainly. I miss you, she said. Ethan looked up, surprised but not defensive. I'm right here. That's not what I mean. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. Avery, this project is temporary. It's important. I know it is, she replied gently. But so are we. Silence followed, not hostile but strained. Ethan reached across the table and squeezed her hand. The gesture was affectionate, yet brief, as though reassurance could substitute for presence. We're solid, he said. You don't need to worry. Solid. The word felt heavy. Structures were solid. Buildings were solid. Marriages, she was beginning to suspect, required more than stability. Later that night, unable to sleep, Avery stepped onto the balcony for air. The city hummed below, distant and restless. Her phone vibrated softly in her hand. Are you awake? Noah's message read. She hesitated before replying. Yes. Long day, long year, she typed before reconsidering and deleting it. Instead, she wrote, just thinking. Noah responded with unusual slowness. About Ethan, Avery leaned against the railing, cool metal grounding her thoughts. She could lie. She could simplify. Instead, she answered honestly. About who I am when I'm not supporting someone else's dream. The reply came quickly this time. You're still allowed to have your own. The simplicity of the statement unsettled her. Noah did not speak in grand declarations or flirtatious undertones. He spoke in affirmations, small validations that accumulated quietly that a few days later, he invited her to an art exhibit downtown, mentioning casually that it reminded him of something she once described wanting to paint. Avery almost declined. Almost. But curiosity, and something more fragile, guided her acceptance. She told Ethan about the exhibit at breakfast. You should go, he said without hesitation. You love that kind of thing. Do you want to come? She asked, giving him the opportunity. Ethan checked his watch. I can't tonight. Maybe next one. Maybe next one had become another moving horizon. The gallery was understated, white walls displaying vivid canvases that seemed to pulse with restrained emotion. Noah greeted her with a smile that felt neither possessive nor casual, just pleased. They walked slowly, discussing color, texture, intention. Noah listened carefully as Avery described what certain paintings stirred in her. When she spoke about how she once painted to translate feelings that didn't have language, Noah didn't interrupt or redirect the conversation back to himself. You stopped translating? He asked quietly. I ran out of space, she replied. Or someone else's plans filled it. His insight was sharp, but not cruel. Avery found herself standing closer to him than she intended, drawn not by physical magnetism, but by the gravity of being understood. As they moved through the exhibit, their arms brushed once. The contact was accidental, fleeting, yet sent a jolt through her that felt disproportionate. She stepped slightly away, aware of the line she had been circling for weeks. Outside the gallery, evening air wrapped around them. Streetlights cast elongated shadows at their feet. Noah, she began carefully, we need to be clear about something. He didn't feign confusion. You're married. Yes. And I'm not trying to change that. Then what are you trying to do? The question lingered between them. I'm trying to be honest, he answered finally. I admire you. I respect your marriage. But I won't pretend I don't feel something. Her heartbeat quickened, not from seduction, but from confrontation. The unspoken had been spoken. You can't say that, she whispered. I just did. Avery inhaled slowly. I haven't done anything wrong. I know, but thinking counts too. Noah studied her expression, measuring his response. Then tell me to step back. The power of that request startled her. He was offering distance. He was placing control in her hands. She should have accepted it immediately. She should have drawn the boundary boldly and walked away. Instead, she said nothing. Silence, she realized, could be its own answer. They parted without physical contact, yet the emotional shift was undeniable. Avery drove home with trembling hands, aware that innocence had thinned. Inside the apartment, Ethan was asleep on the couch, blueprints scattered around him. His face looked younger in rest, free from tension. Avery stood watching him, overwhelmed by conflicting truths. She loved him. She also felt unseen by him. Gently, she gathered the papers and placed them neatly on the table. As she covered him with a blanket, Ethan stirred slightly, but did not wake. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. I don't want to be the reason you lose yourself. Noah had written. Avery stared at the message for a long time. Was she losing herself, or finding parts she had neglected? She typed a reply slowly, each word deliberate. This can't go further. The response came after a pause that felt heavier than all their previous exchanges. Understood. No pleading. No persuasión. Just acceptance. Avery placed her phone face down on the kitchen counter and turned off the lights. She told herself the choice had been made, the line redrawn. Yet as she lay beside Ethan in the dark, sleep refused to come. Because boundaries, once approached closely enough, leave footprints, even when you step back, and Avery could still feel where she had almost crossed. For 3 days, Avery Collins heard nothing from Noah Bennett. The silence was intentional. She recognized it as respect, not indifference, and that distinction unsettled her more than longing would have. If he had argued or pushed, it would have been easier to resent him. Instead, he withdrew exactly as she had asked. Ethan Collins, unaware of the emotional fault line that had nearly split open beneath them, moved through the week with relentless focus. The final presentation for his firm's largest project loomed ahead, and every hour seemed accounted for. Avery watched him prepare late into the night, rehearsing points under his breath, adjusting slides, refining language. She wanted to resent the building that consumed him. Instead, she saw the younger version of Ethan, the one who had once sketched ambitious designs on scrap paper while sitting cross-legged on their apartment floor. Ambition had not changed him. It had amplified him that on Thursday evening, Ethan closed his laptop earlier than usual. "Tomorrow's the presentation," he said, exhaling slowly. "After that, I might finally breathe." Avery studied him carefully. "Are you nervous?" "Terrified," he admitted with a small laugh. "This one decides everything." She hesitated before speaking. "Do you want me there?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. "At the presentation?" "Yes." Ethan leaned back in his chair, genuinely considering it. "I didn't think you'd want to sit through something like that." "You didn't ask." The words were gentle but firm. Ethan's expression shifted as understanding dawned. "Not fully, but enough." "Then yes," he said. "I want you there." The following afternoon, Avery sat in the back row of a sleek conference room, watching Ethan command the space with confidence she had not seen in months. His voice carried clarity and conviction. His hands moved with controlled emphasis. The room listened. She felt a surge of pride so strong it almost erased the loneliness of previous weeks. This was the man she had believed in. This was the dream she had encouraged when it was still fragile. When the presentation ended, applause filled the room. Colleagues surrounded Ethan, congratulating him. Amid the crowd, his gaze searched until it found Avery. For a brief second, everything else blurred till he walked toward her. "You came," he said, as if still surprised. "You asked." He pulled her into an embrace that felt less automatic than usual, longer, tighter, deliberate. She felt his heartbeat racing against her cheek. "Thank you," he murmured. The simplicity of gratitude moved her more than grand declarations could have. That evening, they went out to dinner to celebrate. No laptops, no phone calls, just conversation that flowed without strain. Ethan asked about her week, about her classes at the community center, about the canvas she had taken out of the closet. "You've been painting again?" he asked a little. "Why didn't you tell me?" Avery held his gaze. "I wasn't sure you'd notice." The honesty hung between them, not accusatory, just real. Ethan set his fork down slowly. "Have I been that distant?" She could have softened the truth. She chose not to. Yes. He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He nodded, absorbing the weight of it. "I thought working harder was how I protected us," Ethan admitted. "I didn't realize I was neglecting the very thing I was trying to secure." Avery felt tears press against her composure. Not from anger, but from relief. This was the conversation she had needed weeks ago, the one that might have prevented everything that followed. "There were moments," she began carefully, "when I felt invisible." Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. "I never wanted you to feel that way." "I know." The difference between intention and impact finally stood exposed. Later that night, back in their apartment, Ethan pulled her onto the couch and turned off every distraction. They talked, not about logistics or schedules, but about fear. Ethan confessed that success terrified him because it raised expectations he wasn't sure he could sustain. Avery admitted that silence frightened her because it left space for doubt. "I don't want us to become polite roommates," she said quietly. "We won't," Ethan replied, this time with conviction rooted in awareness rather than assumption. Across the room, Avery's phone rested on the kitchen counter. A single unread message from Noah had arrived earlier that afternoon that "I hope you're okay." She had not responded. Now, sitting beside her husband, feeling the warmth of his hand wrapped securely around hers, Avery understood something with painful clarity. Emotional boundaries were not tested by grand temptations, but by unmet needs. She stood and walked to the counter, picking up her phone. Ethan watched her curiously but without suspicion. Avery opened Noah's message and typed slowly, "I'm choosing my marriage." She stared at the words, ensuring they were truthful, not written from guilt, but from decision. That a reply came minutes later. "Then choose it fully. I hope he sees you. No accusation. No bitterness. Just closure." Avery placed her phone down and returned to Ethan, who opened his arms without question. She rested against him, aware that repair required more than declarations. It required daily attention, deliberate presence, mutual vulnerability. "Tell me about the painting," Ethan said softly. And she did. She described colors she hadn't used in years, shapes that represented distance and reconnection. Ethan listened without interrupting, asking thoughtful questions. The conversation felt fragile but real, like rebuilding something cracked but not shattered. As midnight approached, Ethan brushed a strand of hair from her face. I don't want to lose you to my ambition, he said quietly. You won't, she replied. Not if we keep choosing each other. In the quiet that followed, Avery realized that infidelity had nearly entered their marriage not through passion, but through absence. The line she had approached had forced her to confront what was missing and what was still worth protecting. Ethan turned off the lights and led her toward the bedroom. There was no dramatic music, no sweeping resolution. Only two people aware that love was not self-sustaining. It required maintenance, like any structure Ethan could design as they lay side by side, closer than they'd been in weeks. Avery understood that temptation had not been about Noah Bennett. It had been about recognition. And now, in the darkness, Ethan was finally looking at her, not past her. Outside, the city continued its restless hum, buildings rising toward futures still uncertain. Inside their apartment, something quieter was being rebuilt, not perfectly, not permanently, but intentionally. Avery closed her eyes knowing that the real test would not be resisting another message, but preserving the visibility they had rediscovered tonight, because love, she had learned, was not lost in a single moment. It drifted, and it could be returned if both people were willing to reach.